Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good day to all my friends and my lecturer, Dr. Siti Malisa. So for today, me and Muhammad Yusof bin Abdul Khalid will be presenting the new topic about the intellectual capital. So this is of course which is my from session A to session C, and then session D will be presenting by the Yusof. So first thing first, what is the intellectual capital? The definition of intellectual capital is considered a business asset, which is a intangible asset. The definition of intellectual capital is defined as the value of a company employees' knowledge, skills, business training, or any proprietary information that may provide the company with a competitive advantage. So this definition also highlight can be defined as the collection of all information resources a company that useful to drive the profit, gain new customers, and create new products. There are some literature highlighted the definition of intellectual capital, such as Minovsky and James Iska, 2018. They mentions that the intellectual capital is deemed as one of the most essential and valuable strategic elements in modern business environment. Other literature such as Zeller et al. 2008, the disclosure of intellectual capital may be interpreted to as additional information for the company financial statement. So, the intellectual capital highlights the three categories, which is first, human capital, second, relationship capital, and the third, structural capital. So, what is matter about the establish of the intellectual capital? So, first, we need to understand what is the intellectual capital. So, the measuring on intellectual capital is very subjective when it is not stated on balance sheet as intellectual capital. So that means there is a no intellectual capital mentioned in the balance sheet, but is integrated into intellectual property as a part of intangibles and goodwill in the balance sheet. So therefore, the companies are spending more time and resources in developing the management expertise and training their employees in business-specific areas. So the company need to develop the employee skill in order to create the new development in the company. So the intellectual capital is any component is creating the value of the firm that is more or less directly controlled by the company. So, if the company has higher in intellectual capital, the new product development performance would be enhanced by more innovation skill, as stated by the Zeller et al. 2008. Therefore, if the value of intellectual capital cannot be recognized by the company, it might engage to adverse personal management practice, which cause a loss of valuable employee inside the company. So that means the company cannot be defined, cannot be measured what is the loss that they get into the company. So next, for the accounting evaluation, which is for the intellectual capital. So before that, we need to define the types of intellectual capital as stated earlier, which is the first thing is a human capital. The definition of human capital is the knowledge, skill, and experience that has been by the employees that own the used by individuals, which is inside the company, the employees skills. As you can see, the example for the human capital such as employees' competence, know-how, which is the behavior for the good behavior for the employees, good related knowledge, and innovativeness education that have by the employees. Second, for the structure capital, the definitions for the structure capital is a institutionalized knowledge and codified experience stored in database, procedure, and the organization culture. As you can see, the example for the structure capital, such as culture, spirit of firms, copyrights, trademarks, patents, internal database, and management process. This example, the companies have uh, their value inside the structure capital in the company. So lastly, for the relationship capital, so highlight the definition is the knowledge available of relationship, internal and external, to the organization. For example, such as brand, reputation, strategic alliance, customers, licensing, agreements, and distribution channel. This is the example highlight the important, the significant, the relationship between internal or external of the companies. So, for the accounting for in intellectual capital, some research are found by the Ardikopoulos 2010, which states some requirements on intangible asset have met with the some parts of intellectual capital, not at all, but some parts only. For example, patent and trademarks can be significantly to fulfill the qualifying standard, which can be determined, can be recognized inside the intangible asset, such as the value for the employee skills and so on, cannot be determined. It's hardly and cannot be measured. So it is difficult to identify specific point in intellectual capital when consumer, which is customer, or terminate an organization inventive spirit on transfer and employee information technology IT literacy. So this part is a very difficult to determine the measurable and recognize inside the intangible asset. So the entity added to the intangible asset, which it can be identifiable as non-material asset with a physical substance. The measuring of for the measuring in intellectual capital, there's some highlight the different techniques to measure the intellectual capital, but unfortunately there is no consistency or uniform standard that accepted by the industry. So it's a hardly that we can determine and measure what is the value for the intellectual capital. What we want to need to know the calculation to recognize as a intangible asset. But again, we can determine, we can identify, just such as the balance scorecard, which is a performance indicator for the industry, highlight from perspective of an employee as part to quantify the intellectual capital, which is such as financial, in terms of financial, customer, internal process, and organization capacity. Besides that, Skandia Group considers the transformation of human capital into structural capital as the mission of intellectual capital. So Skandia also measure and create the framework to the as the transformation of human capital into the structural capital as a intellectual capital mainly. So, for the valuation of for intellectual capital, The most significant is the three valuation of which is always be used to determine the intellectual capital. First thing is market value to book value ratio, MV divided by BV. The most well-known indicator of intellectual capital is the difference between market value and book value. Intellectual capital of the firm is based on the estimate of the difference uh, between the book value and the market value. Is this method, the positive difference as a result of the market value is higher than the book value of the company is considered as element of intellectual capital. The realization of the carry amount of the operation under the market value of the investment in intellectual capital elements can give the impressions of being done. Using this method to measure the intellectual capital has provided the advantage for easy calculation and simple operation. But however, in some ways, a clear presentation of the actual situation can be said to make it difficult for the same gain. So next second point is the Tobin Q ratio. The method for this evaluation for investment project put forward by the famous economist, which is James Tobin. However, it has been used extensively in the measurement of intellectual capital. With this method, the total market value of a business relationship between the replacement cost of an asset with the help of the name of the Q describes the ratio, the rate. An important innovation of the concept, which is called as innovation cost, has been existed. So therefore, this concept has been built on the idea that is similar on except for evaluation of alternative goods. In other words, if the renewal or replacement cost of asset is owned by the entity, at least not recognize the market price of the asset will be better invested in other channel. So the Q is formulated as Tobin method, which is indicated the Q equals to market value of business divided by cost of business renewal assets. So as you can see how to determine the ratio. So the ratio must be greater if one. That is we can determine the value the given to the intellectual capital. However, if the ratio is smaller than 1, it means that the business has not given a value to the intellectual capital. So, the third point you say which is the calculating the value of intangible asset. So, using this method, it has been developed for the calculation of the fair value of for intangible assets for business. So much of the value is of intangible asset is to calculate the return on intangible asset, and the calculation of this amount is used to determine the share of return on intangible asset. The main element of this method, the essence of the past and future of all the sum is potential earnings growth is defined as the firm performance. So by this valuation, sorry, by this valuation, the intangible value method that is calculated arises from the need to find a value that will be shown a knowledge-based enterprise and banks as a collateral. So banks asset which are shown which are defined as a collateral are the serious problem for the knowledge intensive business that do not have enough physical asset. So so we can see that this valuation is mainly significant and made to determine the intellectual capital. Some valuation they also use to determine and to measure the intellectual capital, such as the economic value added (EVA), knowledge capital earning (KCE), value added intellectual coefficient (VIC). Lastly is a financial method of intangible asset measuring. So for the session D, I will pass to the Yusuf. Thank you.
Thank you, Aizat. My name is Muhammad Yusof bin Abdul Khalid. My metric numbers is 194837. So today, I'm going to present the current discussion on intellectual capital. For information, there are few studies discussing intellectual capital in recent years. For the purposes of this presentation, I would like to discuss two articles. The first one entitled Being Critical About Intellectual Capital Accounting in 2020 and Overview. The second one, Does Investing in Intellectual Capital Improve Financial Performance? Final evidence from firms listed in Tanzania GSE. We're going to look the first article, which entitled Being Critical About Intellectual Capital Accounting in 2020 and Overview. So this article are by John C. Dume and James Curti, both from Maguire University, which was published in August 2020 in Critical Perspective of Accounting. The article discusses the definition of intellectual capital, 5 stages of intellectual capital research, and intellectual capital practices from several critical perspectives. According to Stewart, 1991, the founder of the intellectual capital terms in the 1990s defined that intellectual capital as the organization brainpower. This means everything in the company which can give competitive advantage to the organization as compared to its competitor is called intellectual capital. The example of intellectual capital is intellectual material, experience, knowledge, information, intellectual property. All of these can be used in order to create wealth for the company. In the early 1990s, the financial accounting standard did not focus on economic values recording as it not allow for the future value. As for the result, it is difficult to do accounting for intellectual capital. However, Skandia Group was the first company who developed the measurement and management of intellectual capital in order to issue an intellectual capital reporting as a part of its annual report. Skandia Navigator was developed as an accounting model which comprised 5 primary focus areas, which are the first one, financial focus, second one, customer focus, next is process focus, next is renewal and development focus, and lastly, human focus. All of these areas of intellectual capital can be measured by using ratio, as we can see in the table in the slide. Let's take a look forward. So next, we proceed to the 5 stages of the intellectual capital research. So for information, according to this article, there are five stages of intellectual capital research. The first one is raising intellectual capital awareness. The second one, creation of guidelines, standard, and is indices to measure, manage, and report intellectual capital. The third one, critical and formative analysis of intellectual capital practices in action. The fourth one, develop and build strong economic, social, and environmental ecosystem. And the last one is develop intellectual capital research with no boundaries and as a worldwide endeavor. According to PT Guthrie in 2000, the Skandia Navigator can be identified as the first and second stages of intellectual research. So the first stage is to communicate the importance of intellectual capital, especially in creating competitive advantage against its competitor. While the second stage is to treat intellectual capital as a legitimate thing and gather all the evidence in order to support its development. The third stage is critical and formative analysis of intellectual capital practices in action. Fourth stage is to develop and build strong economic, social, and environmental ecosystem which identify on how the organization interact with the ecosystem. Last stage is to develop intellectual capital research with no boundaries and as a worldwide endeavor. However, some issues have arisen, especially on the worthiness of intellectual capital to the investor, customer, society, and also the environment. In order to know the importance of the practices of intellectual capital, the author of this article highlighted three articles. The first one is from T. Valio and Sharma, 2020. The second one is Guiliani and Sukong, 2020. And the last one is from Kianto, Ritala, Vanhala, and Helsinki, 2020. According to Di Valio and Sharma 2020, they examine how the company report the intellectual capital by using some environmental, social, and governance framework. When recognizing the importance of intellectual capital in a company internal reporting, the company might include a section of intellectual capital reporting which depart from the financial statement disclosure. According to the Guilini and Skong 2020, they discuss the intellectual capital dimension within the management accounting processes used by the companies in order to make the knowledge visible to the other parties. The issue arose when they questioned what is the role of the term in affecting the valuation of intellectual capital in a company management accounting. The finding is that the intellectual capital can be considered as temporal boundary object, and it is important to understand why the indicator changes over a period of time. And the last one is, according to Kianto, Vitala, Vanhala, and Helsinki, there are 4 themes which can be used in measurement of intellectual capital, which are the first one, contextuality, multidimensionality, human agency and action, and the last one is temporality and dynamics. This means that the author do not eliminate the existing intellectual capital measurement, but they provide the alternative and improvement to the measurement itself. The second article is entitled, Does Investing in Intellectual Capital Improve Financial Performance? Panel evidence from firm listed in Tanzania, DSE. So this article are from Pendo Shukrani Kasoga, which was published in 2020 in Coggan, Economy and Finance. The article discusses the relationship between intellectual capital performance with the firm profitability, productivity, market value, and sales growth. A sample of the study are 22 manufacturing service companies from firms listed in Tanzania. The findings study show that the intellectual capital positively affect firm profitability, productivity, market value, and also sales growth. This is because the increase of intellectual capital, such as knowledge among employees in Tanzania company, help in transforming and enhancing the performance toward the better one. For example, the employee have been given training to increase his or her knowledge, especially on doing the product and goods of the company. As for the result, the efficiency in making the goods or product will increase as they have expertise in it, and the industrialization required a lot of knowledge of skill to be mastered, especially in Tanzania. As for the result, the intellectual capital helped in increasing the firm profitability, productivity, market value, and also the sales. Thank you. I would like to pass to Isaac.
So, lastly, the conclusion regarding the intellectual capital. First, as technology and process improvement becomes more of a differentiating factor within modern companies, the intellectual capitals become a greater factor in achieving success in competitive market. Second, Second is intellectual capital can be measured in various ways, but however, there is no consistent method of measurement that is widely accepted. So that as a result, it can be difficult to pinpoint an exact way to quantify the intellectual capital. So the third is there's a few study discussing the intellectual capital in recent years, just presented by the Yusuf. So that's all.